coming up on 4 years ago, I made this video about Clefable rising in DPP OU, how it became this elite force. Not just this, pretty good UU Pokemon you could bring to an OU game sometimes. No, it was a genuine OU Pokemon. If usage had continued to be taken into account vis-a-vis tiering after the generation ended, Clef would have been OU a long time ago. But it is not, so you can still use it in DPP UU, pardon me, which is awesome because Clef is a great part of DPP UU. Anyway, so this video will not reiterate any of the reasons Clefable rose in DPP OU. They have been made in this video. I would advise you, if you are not familiar with why Clef is such a big deal in DPP OU, to go check that video out. But if you're watching this, you also probably have some interest in the competitive scene, and if you've been keeping up with DPP OU in tournament games in recent times, then you know Clef is absolutely everywhere. And it's one of the best Pokemon in the tier, like very best. It's even better than when I made this video before. It's gone from, oh yeah, let's I don't know, top 15, top 10 maybe, and now it's like, no, it's like top 5, like top 3 according to some people. I don't know where I fall on that spectrum. We're just, refer to my DPP OU viability rankings video. I can't remember. It's been too long. Anyway, so I will not reiterate those points. So if you want to see why Clef became such a big deal, then this video outlines what it does, why it's so good, and it also has a bunch of links to history. Where you saw in the description, which I know a lot of people don't read, which is why I'm mentioning it here. So you can see, this all these early uses of Clef and how it developed. Wow, that's a lot. Anyway, so this video presupposes that Clefable is a force in current DPP OU. You know what it does and why it's so good. So, the controversy, the drama, which I love, of course, but I'm also invested in it. I'm not just, like, oh yeah, let's enjoy some drama. No, like, I care about DPP OU. It's like if, I love Advance, for example, but like if it were to go up in flames tomorrow, then, I mean, I'd be sad, but I would not, go and try and save it from the burning building, Whereas DPP OU, I'd have to fight for it. So, yeah, anyway, that's not really the point. The point is that there are now some people who genuinely want to ban Clefable. Now, these are people who are actual DPP players whose opinions mean something. And the reason I specify that is that, ban Clefable was thrown around, years ago, like before I made that video even. Or around the time of, whatever. Because some people who didn't really play DPP, then they were getting wrecked by Clef because they, either their teams were bad because they were using old teams, or they were using their teams badly, and it's very easy to just get destroyed by Clef if you're not careful, which is part of why it's such a good Pokemon. And so a lot of these players who don't play DPP would start going like, oh, ban Clef because, it's too hard to kill, you can't beat it with passive damage, all that stuff. And I generally, most people thought like, yeah, okay, whatever, play the tier and then maybe you can have an opinion. Play the tier in a serious capacity. Think about it. Build in it. Don't just, copy paste a team your friend gave you because you signed up for a tournament and then lose because you played badly and then start telling the players how to tier the tier. So, those didn't come to anything, obviously. And even when Clef was at its most controversial, then it was revealed that Dugtrio was really the problem. And Dugtrio was, of course, banned, and then everyone started going, oh, well, Clef isn't even that good anymore, which was also stupid, because this is why, in my videos, I tend to stress a lot when people are talking about past generations and viability and whatnot, then sometimes players will get very short-sighted, they'll get a little lost in the sauce, I think is a very appropriate expression for this. Even if it's not usually in my vocab, but they will like get a little too wrapped up in the minutia of what's trending right now, and they'll just say, oh well, right now insert great Pokemon isn't really viable, when clearly it is. And it's like, okay, you got to relax, you got to take it a little easy on this whole strictness of viability thing. So yeah, post Dugtrio ban, people were actually like, oh, I don't even think Clef's that good anymore. And it's like, nothing really changed. Clef was great before Dugtrio was around. And then, a couple months later, they started screaming that Stall was broken and Clef was broken. So, of course, that was nonsense. Anyway, the point of this is that Stall, largely thanks to Clefable, or almost single-handedly thanks to Clefable, honestly, has become a great force in DPP. And that sentiment has remained over the last couple of years, post Dugtrio ban. Once everyone got that initial, oh, Clef isn't even that good out of their system, then they started saying, oh, no, actually, it's really, really good. And Stall is too much. And I take that with a grain of salt, generally, because people are saying, oh, offense is unviable, which is also very clearly, very demonstrably not true. But, let people say what they want to say. But when it comes to a banning conversation, then you have to be more precise about it. So offense is clearly very good, very viable. Whenever someone says, oh, Stall is too restricting, I don't know where this comes from, because I could name a million ways to make a good team beat Stall in my sleep. And I know that, Pokemon players are sometimes willfully, they'll just, plug their ears and close their eyes and pretend like they don't see all the million. Anyway, but, with sometimes, selfishness does enter the equation. And I always go back to the example of Diamond and Pearl Garchomp, which was one of the most hilariously broken Pokemon ever allowed in OU tier. I mean, besides, the obvious outrageous outliers like Darkrai. I mean, there's not stuff that was immediately banned. Garchomp lasted through all of Diamond and Pearl. It wasn't until, Platinum was knocking on our door that Garchomp was axed. And there were several great players who wanted to keep Garchomp around because they liked using it and because it helped them win. So, that stuff can't be ruled out. And that's kind of why, for the record, I am not accusing the DPP player base who wants to ban Clefable. I'm not accusing them of malicious sophistry or anything like that. I am just saying that this kind of thing can happen. That's why these debates around tiering can be so cantankerous. Because people start yelling at each other quickly. It's great. Anyway, so... point being, people don't like Stall more nowadays than when I first got into competitive Pokemon. That's a whole other subject. But generally, it doesn't really come to any tiering action. And I don't think that it's Clefable making Stall too viable that is making people want to ban it, to their credit. It's more that Clef, in and of itself, is just too good at, outlasting everything and killing everything. And, that's basically the gist of everything. And it's like, and I know there's always, well, you could make this video a lot shorter and just say, oh, Clef outlasts and kills everything. It's like, yeah, but do you want the details, or do you just want the synopsis, pumped into your bloodstream? Do you watch movies or shows or whatever, or do you just read the plot synopsis on Wikipedia? Anyway, so... the reason why Clef is more controversial now is I think teams are getting better at dealing with Clef. It's not like it's I'm not that it was an unknown quantity so many years ago, but now teams are more and more aware of it. I think it's more that people are aware of just how restrictive it is in the team builder more and more, and they feel that strain when they're trying to build a team and Clef-proof it, which is very difficult. And look, as much as I personally disagree with the idea that Clef needs to be banned, which I will explain in a second, I have sympathy for it. I do not think it is outrageously stupid or anything. It's not like something like when people were genuinely saying that Mixed Flygon was broken a while ago. That I did think deserved shame and ridicule, because that was unbelievably stupid. But this, this I understand. Clef is very restrictive. However, the gist of the argument here is that I think what makes Clef so tough to take out is a positive for the tier, in that it helps deal with a lot of elements that are otherwise, quite obnoxious. And I will use history once again to demonstrate what I mean. So, I've seen every, argument leveled at DPP over the past decade plus as to why it's, not a good tier. And it usually comes from players who don't know what they're talking about, don't really know what they're talking about. But sometimes, I am not immune to frustration with the tier myself, But that's because I love the tier and I want to see the best for it, not because I just want it to be easy for me to autopilot in. And I have to make another video, and I know that's one of my biggest stereotypes. I have to make another video about why DPP demanding so much of the player is a good thing. I would think that would be... doesn't matter. But I think Clefable demanding so much of the player is also a good thing in this vein, because it means you cannot lazily just spam the best strategies. And now, you could also make the argument, oh, well, now Clefable is the best strategy, which you can just freely spam for wins. And I mean, I don't think that's necessarily wrong, but I think it's not seeing the whole picture. And what I mean by that is, let's take one of the earliest examples of a complaint that was leveled at DPP for a long time, that hazards were too powerful. I remember people like Blue complaining about this all the time. They were like, oh yeah, DPP, what a great tier. It's just Scarf T-Tar versus Starmie versus Rotom. Oh yeah, 50-50s, Crunch Pursuit, so I can spike or so I can spin, or both. Oh yeah, just really awesome and fun. And so people were complaining about hazards for a while, and then here comes a Pokemon which lets you bypass the hazard issue. I mean, and whether it does that, if it's generally too much, genuinely too much to deal with in its own right, then it doesn't matter if it helps with the hazard issue. Of course, I agree. Checking broken is not solid methodology for tiering. However, I don't believe Clef is too much. That's the whole thing. So... and that's the thing, it's not just that it helps with one thing being hazards, it helps with a lot of things that are otherwise very easy to spam and very difficult to deal with. Like that video I made, I don't remember because I haven't watched or listened to it, but I'm sure it mentions how things like Shaman have completely disappeared from the metagame, largely because of Clef completely invalidating Leech Seed. That's another example. Or Lava Plume Heatran, or Will-O-Wisp Heatran, or Toxic Heatran. That used to be an incredibly easy Pokemon to spam to excellent results before Clef rose up and basically said, hey, you cannot just spam passive damage at the opponent. I think that's good. I think that makes for more direct gameplay as opposed to just overloading the opponent with this easy strategy. So, having this great answer to hazards, and again, it's not going to do the whole job for you. It carries you a long way, but you really have to engage. That's the whole thing. And it's not just in stall v stall. I think in offense, it's even better that you cannot just spam spikes and then overload the opponent with like a mixed Flygon or whatever, because it's the first example that pops into my head. So... what I mean by that is that you have to directly, I mean, you need a sense of longevity anyway, but that's true for most offense teams. That's something that Wish Protect Jirachi was already necessitating, and not because of Iron Head flinching. That was just because it was such a good wall, and you could take Iron Head off of it and it would do a similar thing. It's like you need to either have a direct plan for overloading it and not losing any tempo, which is difficult, but that's a good thing, or you need to have longevity, and this is the case for other metagames as well. Like Advance, it has a very similar dynamic against very many of the tier's most prominent walls. And the reason I think this is good, why Clef fulfills a similar role to a defensive Jirachi and why they're so often paired together, is that I think it is good that there are such strong defensive answers to the common offensive threats. Now, you don't want it to go too far in either direction, but that, again, is why I return to what I said earlier about how offense has all the tools in the world to deal with stall teams very, very capably. And yes, some offensive strategies are not going to be as good. They're not going to be as viable. Welcome to Pokemon. Like, this issue is way worse in Advance, I promise, where half the offensive strategies are just praying that you don't face one of insert, top Pokemon here, or several of them on the same team, as they are often paired. So I think it is DPP offense is very, very good. I mean, another half of the player base is also complaining that Gyarados is broken. I mean, not too seriously, grain of salt there, but reconciling a ban Clef position with a ban Gyarados position, because Gyarados is too hard to, I don't really buy that. And I think this is mostly just, players complaining about their tier, which, is their right, If anyone deserves to complain about your tier, a tier, it's the people who actually play it. But, yeah, so Clef holding the tier together against offense. This is in response to another complaint about DPP, and this is perhaps the biggest one. So, two of them, actually. So we've covered how people are complaining about, oh, hazards are too overwhelming. Okay, here's Clef. Oh, status, leech seed passive damage in general, not just hazards. Like Lava Plume Heatran is impossible to answer. It just spams into everything. Oh, well, here's another great answer to that. Toxic Gliscor, for example, another prominent example. And this is not just status that does damage, as in burn and poison. It's also paralysis. What is one of the things people complain about most when they talk about DPP, excuse me? It's that paralysis is stupid. And look, I will never disagree that paralysis is a stupid status, but it's stupid in every generation. The idea that paralysis is uniquely dumb in DPP, that I take issue with. Because every generation, I mean, I won't speak for the newer generations, I'm not as experienced with them, but 1 through 6 at least, and 7 as well, you could start making, I mean, it's harder to spam T-Wave there, because 90 accuracy only halves the speed, but in regards to full para being impactful and dumb, then yeah, so, in that regard, people were complaining, oh yeah, full parrots, the odds are too high. No disagreement there. And here comes a Pokemon, because in Gen 4 only, Magic Guard makes you immune to full paralysis, right? You would think, oh, this is wonderful, a Pokemon that deals with this as well. And then you wind up seeing players complain that you cannot full paralyze Clefable. And that is when I really start saying, okay, pick a lane. Okay, now before I get to the biggest complaint that Clefable helped knock out of existence, then I will also mention that some people say, oh, well, it's boring when Clefable Seismic toss each other. Like, first of all, I disagree. I like long, stally games because the level of strategy you need to execute a game plan over a lengthy period of time, that demands a lot of the player. That is skill. That is a positive. So, I know, if you want quick games, then, it's not the most fun thing in the world to watch or something. But, like, first of all, offense, I have had and I have seen so many games where a good offense team just makes a Clefable stall team look silly. Looks absolutely stupid. And they just get bowled over. This is why, I don't think there's a real truth to the stereotype that Clef teams are super passive, because this was parroted a lot when Clef was first started getting popular. It's like, why is it popular? It's so passive. It's just asking to get bowled over by offense. No, it is not. But offense has the tools to make it look dumb, just like offense has always had the tools to make stall teams look dumb. That doesn't make stall bad. It's I won't get into that dynamic more. So, yeah, and also, the other thing is that I don't entertain any complaints of things being boring, because the closest thing to objectivity we have when tiering Pokemon is the competitive factor, right? And as soon as you introduce, oh, it'd be more fun, it'd be more, enjoyable, whatever, then you may as well introduce anarchy for all as far as I'm concerned. Now, if you want to run a fun tournament with those rules because it'd be more fun, then okay, sure. But if we're talking official tiering, as in this is what the official games will be, this will be the format, then no, you have to... I don't understand how... I don't know, maybe it's the more casual, competitive direction competitive singles has taken over the last however many years. But, people genuinely complaining about stall as it being, broken or something. I don't know. My theory is, without getting too much into it, is that, a bunch of competitive players had a bunch of success, and then they're like, okay, I've got my success out of the way. I just want to have fun now, and I don't want to deal with stall anymore. So, I don't know. Yeah, sorry, I got a text, so I was trying to not read the text out loud as my mouth was still moving. So, yeah, so you can't include, like, fun in this kind of thing. Okay, so the other complaint about DPP, and this one was thrown around for a while, the DPP had a huge blow to its reputation, like, 5-ish years ago, because people who didn't play the game were parroting this nonsense, and because, they would autopilot, and they wouldn't know the tier, and they would lose, and then they would blame the tier. But then, it started seeping in everywhere, even though it was such complete nonsense. But the idea was DPP is too strong as a tier to not have team preview. Offensive teams are too unpredictable and powerful. If you don't know what the opponent's last is, then it's unreasonable to be able to take it on. Like in Gen 5, I would absolutely understand that complaint when you've got monsters like Volcarona running around. But in Gen 4, it was so absolutely not the case. It was an important skill to be tested, that you could figure out the opponent's team. The power level was not overwhelming. And it was the presence of Clefable, and other Pokemon like Jirachi and the reintroduction of Latias and whatnot. Even though, again, people seem to forget that Latias is one of the biggest offensive threats around, but they're obsessed with using the defensive ones. Not that the defensive one is bad, but, the offensive ones, my god. So, yeah, it was largely thanks to the stability of Clef that complaint is completely gone now. Like, I haven't heard it in years. Other than, actually, no, I can't even think of anything. Maybe someone said it once as a joke or something to try and get me upset because it's very easy to. But it's, yeah, it's gone because Clef, you could not make that argument at all today because it's so clearly, yeah, and that's largely thanks to Clef. So, in essence, I do not believe, and the great continued success of offensive teams, backs me up on this, but also just the sheer number of amazing tools there are in the metagame. Like sometimes there are Pokemon that just weirdly disappear from use for a long time. And like for some reason people won't be using Heatran, and they'll justify it like, oh well, there's a lot of ground coverage right now. It's like, yeah, it's also Heatran, and then a few months or however long later, people will go, hey guys, did you know that Heatran is actually really good right now? Why isn't everyone using this? And then it's like, oh yeah, Heatran was good. So sometimes people will just, like, this actually relates to Clefable. People would say, oh, well, Heatran's not good because it's, blanked by Clefable or something. And it's like, Heatran is one of the best Pokemon at taking advantage of Clef thinking it's safe against it. Like, if your Heatran is forever getting walled by Clefable, that's not Clef being too strong. That's a you problem where you are not using the tools available to you, at least to their fullest extent. So that factors into it partly, I think, and partly like to go back to the thing where I just want to have fun. It's like, oh, I want to use everything and have everything be viable. It's like, unfortunately, that is not competitive Pokemon. No matter how many things you axe, there will always be something that rises to the top and is going to be more consistent and better. And like you look at GSC NU, and Xatu is the best Pokemon there, and if I remember correctly, and it severely limits the viability of other Pokemon. Oh, well, I want to use, insert Pokemon here. Well, Xatu destroys it, so that kind of sucks. Yeah, not that it makes that Pokemon impossible to use, but you gotta have a plan for Xatu, and Clef is the same kind of Pokemon. So, I think, yeah, to reiterate, Clef stability defensively is a very good thing for the reasons I mentioned. And I mean, stability against all the things people have complained about in DPP over the years, Clef helps with. And then people want to get rid of it? I don't know, man. It's like, to me it sounds like, oh, well, I hope you are ready to complain about all of those things. For the record, DPP OU before Clef became popular was completely fine as well. It was not too overrun by hazards. It was not too overrun by status or paralysis or, offensive teams being too unpredictable and powerful at all. But I understand where those complaints come from, just like I understand where the Clef complaints come from. But I mean, for the player base, this is why I have trouble taking those kinds of complaints seriously, because they're so contradictory and in such close proximity to each other. And again, I give more credence to these Clef arguments, but I still disagree with them quite strongly. And yeah, for it to take on so many of the most threatening Pokemon, through Knockoff and Encore and Wish, and for it to emphasize a skill-oriented defensive game, then that's a good thing, because again, competitive focus means you gotta emphasize stuff that is skillful, and Clef helps do that. And yeah, and I know I've seen people in the past say, well, it's good for the best players, but, what about the people who aren't the best players? Should the game always be as skill-oriented as possible? And that, again, that argument loses me immediately, because, again, if you don't have competitiveness as a... let me make sure the music is playing. If you don't have competitiveness on your... Oh, whoops, I skipped to... If you don't have competitiveness at the top of your priority list when tiering, then, it shouldn't even enter the equation. So, yeah, that's basically it. I think I've made my point. I will stop myself from repeating myself a million times. So yeah, that's basically it. So thank you for watching/listening. Let me know if you agree or disagree. I'm sure I missed a point or something. I don't think so. I think I got everything in there. So, yeah. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for watching/listening, and I will see you in the next one.